My basic take, and I agree with your analysis of the situation. My basic take was that last year in 2021, the most important kind of delusion was the anti-vax delusion. You know, we knew the vaccines were extremely effective against hospitalization and deaths. And there was a machine of propaganda inflating the concerns about danger. And I think there are totally legitimate conversations to be had around myocarditis risk and that kind of thing. But and you're way closer to this than I am, but there's nothing I've seen that has risen to the level of a legitimate general concern of danger for the average person taking the vaccine. And so it seemed to me that in 2021, the most important kind of delusion was the right-wing anti-vax propaganda that was being believed to the detriment and death, in fact, of many people. As we've moved into 2022, and Delta transformed into Omicron, which was quite mild for almost everyone. It seems to me more and more that the kind of delusion that's most pressing is mandating boosters for people that clearly don't benefit from them, masking children, Zoom school, and just the sense that just a sense that there's no precaution that could possibly go too far. And so it seems to me both sides have been right at different times, or more right at least. And they've been right by accident of circumstance, right? Which is the scary part. It's like you want to be right on purpose because you're tracking the objective reality. You're responding properly to the level of threat. And when the level of threat goes down, your response goes down. But it seems like that's not where most people are, although that could be beginning to shift. So does that seem right to you? How would you parse it differently, if at all?
Yeah, no. I think that's a good analysis. It's interesting because, when the vaccines came out, these are miracle. These are miraculous. I will say that word because you took something that we've never done. You did it in a time frame consistent with actually helping a lot of people, and you prevented severe disease. Now, I, from the beginning, have been telling people, listen, just get vaccinated and shut up, but if you don't want to, I understand. So even back then I was saying, I totally get why your intuition tells you this is a bad idea because you think it's been rushed, and I have ways to explain why it hasn't been rushed, or that should not be a concern. It's new and you're worried about long-term effects, and we have ways to talk about, hey, no vaccine in history has had a long-term effect that's manifest beyond the first 2 months. In other words, we usually see it within the first 2 months of administration. It's just the nature of how these things work. And the politicization. So people are the victim of this politicization. So if they're in the wrong tribe, they're more likely to fear the vaccine, right? Whereas if they're in the left tribe, say the blue church, they're more likely to overestimate the danger of COVID, like you said, to their children. And they're putting their kids in N95 respirators and sending them to school. And so when I talked about it, and when I continue to talk about it, all of this is true. But understanding, getting in the skin of someone who, because you called it delusion, it is because it is a misperception of what might actually be true. But I think when I'm talking about it, I wouldn't use the term delusion. I would say, oh, you're believing exactly what you ought to believe if I were molecule for molecule in your skin, in that tribe, in that hive mind, with your intuition. So let's talk through that. And what I found, Coleman, is that like the emails that I get are usually from people who are more in the resistant camp. And they'll say, the way you talk about it, I didn't feel dumb. I didn't feel shamed. I didn't feel coerced. And I went out and got the vaccine because you made me feel like I might help my mother, or it just felt like the right thing to do after listening to what you said. So some of it is our communication. I feel like the thesis tribe really likes because they're right about vaccines, right? So they really like that, and they get exuberant in how they talk about it. Whereas the right side, the red church side, the antithesis side, is actually not wrong about, like, the restrictions and their effects on children, effects on business, like the age disparity of risk, understanding risk that you're more likely to die in a car accident than you are of COVID if you're under 30. So having those conversations actually in a synthesis way is quite important. So you're right. Now it's shifted to where reality is much more consistent with antithesis view, but still vaccinating is a good idea. In any country, you look at Canada, 80+% vaccination rate, their per capita death rate is a third of the United States, with similar population, although they don't have the same minority population. They may not have the same levels of diabetes. So there's a lot of nuance there, but highly vaccinated populations, Great Britain, they do better. So all of it's kind of true, but partial, and trying to dig through it while being, it's tough because you want to say, oh, like, this is just how it is, but that doesn't actually cut through the tribal thinking. It's very nuanced.
Yeah, I think, I've actually struggled to get a doctor on my podcast who will explain why the vaccines are safe and effective without simply sneering at people who disagree. And, I've tried to do that, not very successfully, because, not everyone has your attitude towards it. There is a kind of enjoyment in the suffering of the unvaccinated that is sometimes barely concealed. There's been this sort of tradition of publicizing when an unvaccinated person, especially a public person, gets hospitalized or dies with a schadenfreude that is just so barely concealed. And that's the kind of attitude. It is of a piece with the famous deplorables comment by Hillary Clinton, which is, at the end of the day, if people think that you think that they're just fucking rubes, it's going to be very hard in a natural way for them to listen to you, even when you're right, especially if you make no effort to correct for your condescension.
Man, you have nailed it. I'll be honest with you. Part of the reason I get a lot of criticism from Thesis Tribe, it's funny now, I call it Blue Tribe, Red Tribe, because it's so political. You can tell on Twitter based on the description in the handle, like which tribe they're in. Like it's really quite clear now that we're wearing masks, we're using sort of pronoun designations and things like that as a tribal identifier, rather than anything else, in many, not always, but in many cases. And you can see the same thing on the red side, right? So I struggle. I used to be that guy, Coleman. Like I would, because with kids' vaccines, it's tough for me because the anti-vaccine component pre-COVID that was anti-kids vaccine, it really felt like, man, these people are harming kids who are innocents. And there's a righteous indignation, a moral outrage that happens. And if you ever see kids get sick with a preventable illness in the hospital, you get radicalized. Yeah. And so there are a lot of doctors, myself included, who got very angry. And I would make videos like, we should have no quarter for these people, like just ban them from social media, crazy stuff like that. And I realized I was totally wrong. I was completely wrong because I could not inhabit the view that they had cleanly because I was so biased. Now with COVID, it's much easier for me because these are smart people who message me. These are engineers and lawyers and other doctors who are like, dude, do you feel like everybody's gone crazy with the safety creep? Like if we can do one thing, we want to like do another thing. And this kind of thinking about it has made it difficult. Now, to try to find a doctor to talk about vaccines, you're either going to get Cuckoo McCocoa Puffs, Malone. And I say this because, and this is my bias, when I listen to Malone, like my skin crawls and I want to stab my eyes out because everything he's saying is so easy to just go, yeah, that's just not right. And it's from an anti-vaccine playbook that I know very well. But when I talk about him publicly, right, I try to inhabit the position that he's in. and take the parts that he is saying that I can inhabit. Like, hey, you know what? Pharma is misincentivized. You know what? We should look at therapeutics too. You can study, ivermectin and all of that, but really look at the other therapeutics that have been randomized controlled trials shown to help and promote them. So you try to do that, but you try to get a doc on the show. Like when I interview docs, the criticism that Thesis Tribe levels at me is, why are you always interviewing these heterodox positions, these contrarians? Vinay Prasad, Monica Gandhi, who, by the way, just had her pediatric grand rounds at UCSF canceled because a mob on social media apparently made a stink about, her heterodox positions on COVID. Marty McCary, Jay Bhattacharya. I get these guys on because they try not even to shame the blue church side as much as they can. But if you get Eric Topol or one of these other guys on, there is a barely concealed dude, come on, are you stupid? Get vaccinated. And they're
very
not
persuasive.
Wrong. Yeah.
I mean, it's the degree to which this has gotten crazy in some places. I mean, I can just tell two personal stories, and I'm sure anyone living in blue America is going to have these stories, and there are analogies in red America. It's just, I happen to be living in New York. I happen to have grown up in a liberal suburb of New York. So as heterodox as my views are, still, the social bubbles I've just grown up in have only barely punctured because of massive effort. That's how thick these bubbles tend to be. But, I have one musician friend that's a professor, just like the sweetest guy, and such an excellent professor who was called by the president of his university where he teaches music and told he had to get the booster by tomorrow in order to teach his, get this, Zoom class. He was teaching a Zoom class at the beginning of the semester and had to get the booster on pain of being suspended without pay. And so he did it. He's not an especially dogmatic person either way with the vaccine. He was not like, it's not worth losing my job over. I don't fear it, but it's something he just wouldn't have done because he didn't feel he was high risk. He didn't feel, it was just a bit of a nuisance for him. But the idea that people all over the country are just being forced to do this thing that is neither particularly harmful nor particularly beneficial for them, but that is just being applied by force is insane.
It's not. The problem with the booster thing for people under 65, it's the people over 65 or people over 50 with multiple comorbid conditions that can benefit from a booster in terms of severe disease, which is what we care about. Keeping people out of the hospital, all of that. Colds and flus, we don't care about as much. We get them every year. But what we're doing now is we're coercing young people into getting something that has a very tiny benefit for them individually and a very tiny benefit communally, because Omicron spreads largely regardless, although the vaccine does reduce your chances of actually acquiring it. So there is a small community benefit. But the question is, individuals can make that decision. If they live with an elder who's at high risk, someone who's immunocompromised, et cetera, you can make the decision. So now it is more in the realm of individual choice, as opposed to necessarily a communitarian, we need to mandate this thing. But what we've done now is we've created this cognitive dissonance where people they recognize this is crazy. I'm doing a Zoom course. And now our public health trust continues to plummet. There's resentment and something that was seen in the 1918 flu pandemic, which is called psychological reactance, where people who are told what to do when they can't see it, it's invisible, or it doesn't make sense to them, they get very resentful and they will try to do the opposite through whatever means necessary. This is normal human behavior. I know you did a great show with Steven Pinker talking about our heuristics and our biases and things like that. These are actually adaptive in certain circumstances. And so they're being actually good human beings. It may not be very adaptive to the current world, but the thing is, when you have policies like this that trigger that, you're causing harm. And so that's where we are now. We're in this kind of group thinking. And then what that does, it validates the conspiracy thinkers. Oh, see, it's top-down control. It's pharma. It just continues to feed that line of thinking, it's very, very, very bad, very damaging.